So the first genes that we look at from a dietary standpoint are these HLA genes. So this is kind of, that's a little snippet, that little clip is a clip from my software. So a patient would receive a whole giant printout of about 30-some pages that we would look at. And it's very daunting, really, from a patient perspective. So I try to explain it and understand I require all my patients, if we're going to go through a genetic profile, to watch my videos under the genetic tab, which is a little daunting in itself. But if you watch them a few times, you start, and I'm not trying to say that you have to be like knowledgeable in all this, but it's almost like we're speaking a little different language. So the more you can know, I think the better you can understand why I'm making recommendations. So these first HLA genes are genes that affect gluten sensitivity. So when you look at this profile, like we're going to see a whole bunch of these SNPs if you stay with me for these few hours. It has the gene there, the HLA-DQ-A1, and then the gene name after it. You see the top one on there. And then there's a blank, because this particular individual, who I cut and pasted this off of, does not have a defect there. So you want to have a blank here. Does my pointer work? Oh, it doesn't work on the screen. Great. So you want to have a blank after where it says in the column of variant. I use the term defect. It's because I'm used to using that. A better term would be variant, because some of these variants can be actually beneficial to have. Most of them aren't. So that person does not have a variant in that particular gene. These are the known genes that affect gluten sensitivity. Now I think somebody's going to be talking about gluten sensitivity in a little bit, so I'll leave this alone. But when I see a genetic profile like this, and the person has a double allele defect in that bottom one, do you see that? So they have a 2 there. So they inherited a gene from their mother and from their father. And a single allele defect in that middle one. Do you see that? So, as you're going to see some other categories of genes that we're going to talk about, when this particular individual has a smattering of defects throughout all the genes, I would say this isn't all that bad. But when a person has any defects in this, I would say you shouldn't be eating gluten from a genetic standpoint. So everything we're going to be talking about today, and if we do a gene profile on you, we're only talking about your genes. So there are other reasons why a person should change their diet. So a person could have no defects in their HLA genes for gluten and yet still have gluten sensitivity. Because gluten sensitivity has to do with an immune reaction to the peptides of the protein gliadin, and it really has much less to do with a genetic predisposition. Follow me? But that's a lecture in itself, and I'll save that for another person. So the MCM6 gene has to do with lactose intolerance. Now I don't usually take people off of dairy because of lactose anyhow. We take people off of dairy because of the protein in dairy, casein, and they have a sensitivity to that because they have an immune sensitivity to it. We're not really looking at the genes. So really when I look at a person's gene profile, we pretty much ignore this first piece, except it does give me some gravity to push them to what I already tell most people to go on a gluten-free diet anyhow. Because inflammation in the gut equals inflammation in the brain, and inflammation in the brain equals problems in the rest of the body. So if you're not already gluten-free, and we're going to have a lunch here in a little while, and it's probably going to be bread. I believe I fall into the category that I think everybody should be gluten-free, because it's highly inflammatory to your gut. And when you have inflammation in the gut, you have inflammation in the brain. So we'll move on. This also tests for peanut allergy genes. Now, I don't see people particularly for allergies anymore. I see mainly cancer and Lyme patients, and even this person doesn't have a known peanut allergy, but she has 2 defects, single allele defects in both the peanut allergy genes. Now also, if you're fairly compromised health-wise, you probably shouldn't be eating peanuts anyhow because they have a lot of mycotoxins and mold. Nobody should really be eating a lot of peanuts, right? But certainly if you have the defects, you should not be eating peanuts. Okay? Still with me? All right. So there is some genes for caffeine consumption and how well you detoxify caffeine. That's that last one, that caffeine metabolism. This person has a double allele defect. In this particular case, this variant actually helps you detoxify, metabolize caffeine much quicker. Before we had the gene profile, I'd say, is caffeine good for you or bad for you? Well, does caffeine make you have to go to the bathroom? Yeah, I drink about 3 cups of coffee and I'm running and I have to go urinate. Well, then you have the gene that metabolizes caffeine very quickly, and caffeine isn't necessarily bad for you. No, I could drink a whole pot of coffee, it doesn't make me go to the bathroom. Well, then you shouldn't be drinking coffee. Okay? But now we can look at the genetic picture and say, should you be drinking coffee or shouldn't be drinking coffee? And this person would be fine drinking a little coffee. But if you had a blank there, then you probably shouldn't be drinking very much coffee. Follow me? But that's just kind of a fun one. That's not what we're dealing with real health or not. Now we start to get into real sickness. Your FUT2 genes, actually now in the new gene profiles, now understand the software that we use, we're constantly adding new genes as discoveries are made. Because this is literally a new science. So new research is coming out literally daily on what the different genes do. So we did this Human Genome Project, you know, in America. They gathered all this information of all the different genes, and they realized that there's a whole lot less than they thought there was, and now they're trying to figure out what these different genes do. The FUT2 gene's responsibility is very important when it comes to your gut, because your gut health has to do with a number of different things. The cells of the intestinal tract have to be tightly packed together. That's how they are when you're born. And they only allow things through that you have receptors for, or that are small enough that can sneak through between the cells. So if we have a healthy cell membrane, a healthy cell wall, healthy cells of the intestinal tract, then we're going to have a healthier disposition overall. However, there's all sorts of things that damage our gut. So there's genetically modified foods that damage our gut. There's inflammatory things that damage our gut. Medications, chemicals, yada, yada, yada. There's a zillion things that damage our gut. When we have a damaged gut, I said that could equal a damaged body, because remember, I've said in the past, you are what you absorb, right? So you aren't just what you eat, you are what you absorb. Let's use an example. Well, I'm not supposed to eat a lot of fish from Lake Michigan because it has mercury in it, so I better not, you know, I'm limited to the amount of fish. Actually, do you have absorption sites in your gut for mercury? No. But do you probably have a damaged gut that mercury is going to be able to leak through and get into your bloodstream? Yes. So if you had a perfectly healthy gut, eating some mercury in your fish shouldn't bother you. You should expel it into the toilet. However, when I have a damaged gut membrane and my epithelial cells of my gut are spread apart, all things get through that weren't, a lot of things get through that weren't supposed to get through. Then I make myself toxic and I make myself inflamed, because my immune system responds to these things that never should have been in my bloodstream in the first place, and my immune system goes, what in the heck is that? Let's kill it. And it fires an inflammatory response. When there are food particles, peptides of gluten and other things, and heavy metals and toxins and things like that, those things don't die when your immune system tries to kill it, and all you do is have this systemic inflammatory process going on. Follow me? Health of the gut equals health of the body. When you have inflammation in the gut, you also have inflammation in the brain. So it's really important to have a healthy gut. Your FUT2 genes, now, there's only 3 listed here. Now in our new reports, I think there's 20. These are responsible for making an enzyme that makes the healthy mucosal layer that lines the intestinal tract. So the mucosal layer that lines the intestinal tract, you can think of as the apartment building for your microbiota to live. So your microbiota are your normal flora, the good bacteria that live symbiotically in your gut, that help kill off pathogens, that help keep a balance. You guys still with me? Okay. So if I have FUT2 gene defects, like this poor person right here, double allele defects in all 3 of them, they do not have the carpenters to make a healthy apartment building for the microbiota to live from birth. So even, let's pretend, give this person the best case scenario. They had a mother who did not take drugs, did not ever take antibiotics, inherited through the mother's breast milk a wonderful microbiota, that normal, healthy floral layer. So they have a perfect microbiota. The mom did not give her antibiotics at all during her early years, which would destroy the microbiota. Let's pretend they have a perfect microbiota, but they have these FUT2 gene defects, so they don't make a really healthy mucosal layer. And now they get Lyme at 23 years old, and they go on doxycycline for early Lyme, which really, in my book, would be the right thing to do. But it also wipes out the healthy microbiota that they had. And now, having FUT2 gene defects, it's very hard to get that back. So the people that we see with FUT2 gene defects have a very difficult time with chronic health conditions, because they have a very difficult time keeping a healthy microbiota. Yes?
So what do you suggest?
So what do we suggest? You're getting ahead of us. So this is very important. These FUT2 genes are really super important. And with the patient base that I see, we see people that have a lot of defects here. Not all of them have double allele defects in all of them. This person is really having a difficult time. So then you go back to last year's Rife Symposium to learn how to heal the gut.